So the focus of this session is really on adapting to change. So like everything else, national research facilities have to adapt to changes in the environment in which they operate. And these changes can be incremental, or as the pandemic has shown us, they can be sudden and transformative. So in the next 20 minutes or so, our two speakers will provide examples of how their facilities were able to contribute to the national and global efforts to respond to the pandemic, and how their operations have had to shift and adapt in this context. So our first speaker, Dr. Volker Goetz, is Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, VIDO, at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. Prior to that, he served as Associate Director of Research from 2007 to 2018. He's a professor of veterinary immunology at the University of Saskatchewan and has served on editorial boards and national and international scientific review panels, including for the NIH in the US, the CEPI, the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and the Gairdner Foundation, among others. Our second speaker will be Dr. Naveed Aziz. He serves as the Chief Administrator. Oh, pardon me. Oh, sorry, I heard talk. So Dr. Aziz is the Chief Administrative and Scientific Officer of CGEN, Canada's national platform for genome sequencing and analysis. Prior to that, he served as Director of Technology Programs at Genome Canada and Head of Genomics at the University of York in the UK. Naveed's leadership has helped CGEN play a key role in advancing technologies in genomics through his passion about developing powerful and efficient solutions for generating and storing big data and depositing it into open science databases to allow high-speed data exchange, both nationally and internationally. He also serves on numerous national and international scientific advisory committees. So both of our speakers will present for approximately 10 minutes. We'll have time for a few questions after their presentations. And then following the two presentations, we'll actually break out into small group discussions with the goal to identify some common challenges and come up with good practices that we can share amongst the facilities that we funded through the Major Science Initiatives Fund. So we shared in the email ahead of the meeting some of the ideas that we came up with based on our discussions with you and based on our reading of the annual reports from MSI-funded facilities. However, the discussion topics will be determined based on your interests. This session is really, it's for you to identify the topics of interest to you and to discuss the challenges you have faced and share solutions that you can come up with. So as you're listening to the presentations, if there are things that you feel would be good topics that would be worthwhile to discuss in these breakout sessions, please put those in the chat box as we go along. And as I said, after the two talks, I will come back and we'll explain a bit more how we're going to work the particular breakout sessions and how we're going to go about doing that portion of this particular session. So, but without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Volker to start us off with a presentation about VIDO Intervac and how they've responded to the pandemic. So off to you, Volker, and Alex will put up your slides in just a moment.
Well, thanks very much, Mark, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for organizing such an interesting workshop. I think we all have lots of thoughts on what the challenges have been given the global situation and what our organizations had to go through. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to highlight a few things that VIDO has been able to do and accomplish over the last few months, and really has helped Canada to respond to this pandemic. And then, as the title says, also talk a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities we have seen. Next slide, please. For those of you that are not familiar with it, so VIDO is a research center here at the University of Saskatchewan. We have more than 45 years of expertise in both human and animal health, currently about 160 staff members and a budget of about $20 million. And in the context of this, most importantly, we operate some of the most advanced infrastructure in Canada and even around the world. Next slide, please. And this is the International Vaccine Center, one of the 10 MSIs in the countries. And this is where we are receiving support from CFI. This is one of the world's largest CL3 ag facilities. So that means containment level 3 ag, which is even higher than that. It's a research hotel that is specifically designed to foster academic and industry collaborations. It's available to users from all over Canada, but also from around the globe to use the facility here. and do their research here. And this is what we have used in particular now for our response to COVID-19. We're currently constructing an in-house manufacturing facility right in this glass building here on the right side. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse now or not, but you can see there's this glass wing, and it's essentially the third floor in which we're building this new manufacturing facility. Next slide, please. So in terms of responding to COVID-19, we were one of the first organizations in the country to respond to it. Much of this was actually done in collaborations with others. For example, the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg at the Public Health Agency, or CFIA in Winnipeg. Very early on, we reached out to our partners and said, you know, we are here to help you, tell us what you need us to do, and so on. And VITA was the first organization in the country to isolate the virus. This was done from one of the early patient samples, one of the first cases. The sample was isolated by the colleagues at Sunnybrook Health, and then sent to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg sent it to us, and we were able then to isolate it. We were the first in Canada to have an animal model established, and you need these animal models to be able to evaluate new vaccines, drugs, antivirals, or therapeutics. And we're now the first university to have a vaccine candidate in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical testing. We're currently in phase 1, but it's a combined phase 1, phase 2. So we're rolling right into a phase 2 trial. And we worked with more than 80 companies since January of last year. And that actually is one of the challenges that we have seen now. We're doing about 10 times the contract volume right now, helping other Canadian companies and other Canadian groups on identifying solutions for this disease, but I'll get back to that later on. Next slide, please. This is the funding that we received last year. And so you can see there is essentially 3 elements to it. There is money directly allocated for developing the vaccine, and which is now in clinical trials. Then CFI announced $11.3 million, and that was money that really helped us to enhance our research capacity. And I want to point that out. It was so important that CFI was really, really flexible in how this money can be used. And it helped us to bring in over 35 new staff members, train them, and get them working on this COVID-19, but at the same time also be able to reallocate internal staff members and resources towards this project. So the flexibility in this funding has really helped us a lot in responding so quickly. You can see there is $12 million through ISED for the construction of the manufacturing facility. And then also very, very important to highlight, the province of Saskatchewan also stepped up significantly last year by giving us $4.2 million, both for the manufacturing facility, but also for the vaccine research. And their funding is actually directly going into our vaccine that is now in clinical trials. And you can see we were collaborators on a number of CHR grants. Next slide, please. Very important, of course, in getting this support as well. So this is the team that we have been able over the last few months to assemble. You can see there is now many, many individuals that are involved directly in the COVID-19 research. And this is really one of the challenges that we have seen in responding to this pandemic, recruiting enough people so that we don't burn out our existing staff. And worker fatigue and burnout is a real thing, especially if you have to work in high containment, where you wear PPEs and so on, where you can't go to the washroom, where you can't have a drink for hours, sometimes for 6 hours at a time. So what we planned and what we implemented is kind of like almost shift works, where some of the members are starting early in the morning and others are starting around noon, and they were extending what we can do in a day in making the process more effective. What we also learned is that it is very important for us, and I'll come back to that later on, if we think about future emerging diseases, to ensure that we have enough trained workers around. We now think that it takes about 5 months from starting the recruitment process to bringing a person in, to properly training them to work in high containment and get the level where we confidently, and the worker is confident, to work with a potentially deadly virus. It takes some time to be trained. And so if we want to think about how Canada can be better prepared for the next time, that's really, I think, an area that we need to think about, that we always have enough expertise and workers able to immediately respond to these threats. Next slide, please. And then you can see, over the last year, we have worked a lot with other Canadian organizations. VIDO really has become one of the go-to places in Canada for COVID-19 research. You can see both on the government as well as on the academic side, we've had lots of interactions, lots of collaborations. And as I mentioned, more than 40 Canadian companies have had VIDO test their products, their vaccines, their drugs, and their antivirals. We've been also able to second professors from other universities. You can see here Professor Alison Kelvin, who's from Dalhousie University and now here at VIDO for a year. And similar, Jason Kindrachuk, who is a Canada Research Chair for Emerging Diseases from the University of Manitoba, who also came for a year with his group to help us in responding to this pandemic. Next slide, please. So this is referring to what we call contract research. This is really what the MSI is all about. This is our mandate, helping Canadian companies, Canadian academic researchers, and even the government to find solutions for this crisis. And so we have completed in the last 12 months more than 80 contracts, or working on some of these still, 50% roughly Canadian and 50% international. And you can see the focus there is on antivirals, therapeutics, but also on vaccines. And many of the Canadian vaccines that are currently in development have been tested here at VIDO in our animal models. This is all possible because we are ISO certified, and we have a dedicated contract research group with certified project managers and so on that are specifically trained and their skills are in facilitating all this contract. But again, this is about 10 times the volume that we normally do, and that has created huge challenges for us in the organization in just simply being able to keep up with all that work. Important that all of this is supported, of course, through the MSI program and the government of Saskatchewan. And it's important to recognize the contributions there. Next slide, please. This is just to highlight our own vaccine. You may have seen in the news. One of the activities, of course, is to develop our own vaccine. We're now in clinical trials. And you can see we've given many presentations to Canada Vaccine Task Force and so on. And we're looking forward now in organizing the next phase, which is really the phase 3 trials, and then eventually getting it into the arm of Canadians. Next slide, please. This is the manufacturing facility that we're building right now. So this is how our manufacturing facility might look in the future. Next slide, please. And this is how it looks at the moment. So construction is underway. You can see the piping and all that is now in place. The walls are about to go up within the next few weeks. And you can see in the long term, this facility is able or will be able to make all kinds of vaccines except for the RNA vaccines, and produce as much as even 40 million doses a year. Construction is complete or scheduled to be complete by October of this year, and then we're hoping that we are able to start our first production runs sometime next year. Next slide, please. So what were some of these challenges? Well, as I mentioned, the contract research, the reallocation of the resources, the shortage of trained workers that we had. Although we had groups working in high containment, the manpower issue, people are quickly burning out, the fatigue and so on. And so early on, we pushed for bringing in more people. CFI was very supportive there and helped us a lot in making that possible. As I mentioned, we hired more than 35 additional staff members. But even as I said, it takes a while before a person can work in high containment. This is not a regular lab. You have to be well trained. You have to work in body systems and so on. And of course, you're working with a potentially very serious pathogen. Of course, we do this all by ensuring the worker safety. And again, these public health measures are absolutely important for us and have taken a lot of time considering, for example, working in cohorts rather than having whole groups working. What do we do when we have our first case? How can we contain it as much as possible? We have done a lot of planning on trying to come up with the best strategy of mitigate the impact as much as possible. And then, of course, on the other hand, we're seeing that there is a reduction of all the or most of the non-COVID-19 research activities, and that by its own also has created a lot of challenges to our organization. Next slide. At the same time, of course, this also offers a lot of opportunities for the future. And really the message, I think, is that we are giving, and that all of us are strongly feeling, this is exactly what we're here for. We do have the infrastructure through the MSI program, through CFI funding, and we do have the expertise. This is why VIDO exists. This is why we are this is our mandate to respond. And so as part of Intervac and the MSI, we really have taken our mandate to work with academics and companies very, very serious. As I mentioned, more than 80 companies. A lot of our energy and resources has gone into that work, which we think has direct benefit on the lives of Canadians. It also has created, of course, the opportunity for more national and international collaborations on the vaccines, on the drugs, on the therapeutics, on the small molecules, and so on, and really is benefiting Canada overall in terms of its innovation ecosystem, attracting SMEs and pharma to Canada, and of course also helping us in being better prepared for the next one. And that's really the last point there, helping to shape Canada's preparedness. VIDO is really now one of the key centers in the country that has the ability and the infrastructure to respond to these emerging diseases. And this is really how we see our organization can help the country to be better prepared for the future and play a significant role in Canada's biomanufacturing and innovation strategy. Next slide, please. And so the key here is really that I think when we think about these emerging diseases, we all now understand what the impact of these diseases is. And it's just a matter of time before the next one comes, even on the animal side. And so what we need to have in place are these key centers in the country that can work together as a network of centers and can specifically focus on emerging infectious diseases and respond quickly. And so the point that this slide that I wanted to make here is that as a country, we need to think about how we support and long-term operate these centers. And it's like, like I'm trying to show with these two pictures there of the firefighters in New York and the fire department. It is almost like a fire insurance. You want to have these workers trained and in place before the fire breaks out and not after. And that's really the message that I wanted to give everyone. That's why these MSIs are so important. That's why it is so important to have these critical infrastructure centers in the country. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm done with my presentation, just to acknowledge, of course, the generous support by the government, both of Canada as well as Saskatchewan, CFI, CHR, and the many private funders that have now come forward in supporting our activities here at VIDO. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Volker. I really appreciated that talk. I noticed we have a couple of questions in the chat and maybe time for one or two more after that. So I'll just read out the first one for you. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Let me turn my volume. If building a new manufacturing facility, why not build one that will also do RNA vaccines, particularly for emerging diseases that seem to be gaining in importance? What were the limits preventing implementation of RNA vaccine manufacturing?
Mark? So that's a great question. The process actually of making RNA vaccines is quite different from tissue culture vaccines or vaccines that involve tissue culture. You don't use bioreactors and all those things anymore. And again, those facilities are very complex in their planning and design. Our facility is designed very uniquely in that it can do human and animal vaccines at the same time, including bacterial, viral vaccines. So there's various systems that we can do here, making it one of the most unique. And then, of course, it's linked or connected into our containment area. Changing it now or upgrading it to RNA would make it very, very complicated from a regulatory perspective. Those are completely different processes that are involved there. And I think the strategy there for Canada is to better have, some that can focus on the more traditional vaccine technologies, and then more chemical plants, if you want, that can work on the RNA vaccines.
Excellent. I think sort of along the same lines, how do you work with other facilities that are being built for other vaccines and therapeutics, such as Precision Nanosystems, Medicago, and the NRC? You're muted, Volker.
Sorry, I didn't realize that you unmuted me. So, for Mount Royal, for the NRC facility, there is a close interaction with them. In fact, I'm sitting on their advisory board. They have a very similar mandate to what we are doing. Precision nanosystems. We just had a call yesterday, for example, as part of Canada's strategy right now to look at biomanufacturing and innovation. There's close interactions there. So I think, as I mentioned, Vito has become one of Canada's go-to places for COVID-19 research. All of these companies have had their vaccine tested here, and this is really how we're working with them closely together.
Excellent. So I think in the interest of time, we'll move on to Naveed Aziz's presentation. So I will switch control over to you, Naveed, and we will let you wanted to share your own slides.
Yeah,
so
I'm fine either way, Mark, but yeah, if you can do that, that's fine. And if Alex wants to share, she has my presentation, that's fine too. Either works.
All right. So Alex, do you want to share Naveed's slides then? And
I did give you ability to share, Naveed, if you prefer, but I have no problem sharing your slides as well.
Well, okay, let me do that then. I'll do that. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, hopefully you can see my presentation now.
Yeah, I do see it.
Do presentation mode. Okay, all good. Okay, let me move this. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Thank you. I should start by thanking the CFI team for organizing this this virtual MSI workshop. We've had the workshop face-to-face in the past and has been a lot of learning and fun, but I guess this year this will have to do. But next year, hopefully, we will, or soon we will be able to go back to face-to-face. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the role CGEN has played in our collective response to the current pandemic, as the session title suggests. But I think before that, I would like to give you a snapshot of CGEN. So as some of you already know, that CGEN's Canada's national platform for genome sequencing and analysis, with nodes in Toronto at Sick Kids Hospital, Montreal at McGill, and in Vancouver at the BC Cancer Agency, University of British Columbia. CGEN's vision is to serve as Canada's engine for genomics-enabled research and discovery. And we do that by producing and bringing access to a critical mass of genomic data, and by building and operating a genomics technology platform that enhances Canada's capacity for genome sequencing and analysis. One of our, as you can see on the slide here, one of our major, on the top right-hand side, one of the major priority for us is to enable large-scale human genome sequencing data generation. And that will become clear in a few slides why I specifically pointed that out. So we have just over 200 staff across the 3 nodes that serve around 2,000 PIs every year. Remember that each PI lab has multiple researchers and multiple expertise and multiple projects. We generate around 1,600 terabytes of sequencing data, which equates to around 15,000 30x human genomes. And for the non-biologists in the virtual room, this equates to around 800,000 HD movies on Netflix. And if you are willing to sit and watch them back to back, it will take you about 140 years to finish them all. So just to give you a scale of the data that we produce every year. And also annually, we invoice around $40 million in fee for service to our users across Canada. With that, I think I would like now to talk a little bit about the role we have played in supporting Canada's national response and the fight against COVID-19 through a specific effort funded by the federal government. So back in April 2000, the government of Canada funded the CanCOGET consortium through Genome Canada, which included genome sequencing of 150,000 SARS-CoV viral genomes. But also relevant to CGEN, the federal investment included a $20 million support for CGEN to lead a project to sequence 10,000 human genomes, a project that we dubbed HostSeq. So by that way, HostSeq and CGEN's mandate was to sequence and data bank genomes of 10,000 Canadians affected by COVID-19. and help investigate genetic variations that impact disease outcomes. We do that by putting data into the hands of people who will be able to ask the appropriate scientific questions and will lead to providing genetic evidence to support therapy and vaccine development. So hopefully we can help Okar's shop as well. So I put this slide up just to show the timeline of how quickly, as relevant to today's discussion, so how quickly we were able to assemble and deploy our efforts. This was mainly due to Seagen's vision and mission to remain in a ready state, to support Canadian researchers and to take maximum advantage of the power and promise of genomic sciences. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. But here you can see that the funding announcement was made on April 24th. And by early June, which is within 2 months, we were ready to start sequencing any patient that were recruited into the program. Now we were able to assemble an outstanding team to deliver the project, and I'm not showing the structure of the governance of the team because of the time I was allocated today. But by June we were ready to sequence, which is within 2 months. We were able to assemble or put in place national consents. We were able to put in place appropriate protocols and also articulate a data governance structure for the project. Now, for those of you who are aware of the challenges of planning and delivering a population-wide large cohort study, genomics or otherwise, for that matter, would appreciate that this timeline was highly efficient and not something that can be achieved easily. So why were we able to do that? I'll talk about that in a second. But before I move on to talking about that, I would also like to highlight that Seagen has also been involved in several other activities to help partners and researchers across Canada in responding to the pandemic. For example, the Seagen Montreal node at McGill has been working closely with the provincial health authorities to sequence a large number of Quebec's viral genomes. We have to date sequenced over 15,000 viral genomes, and have helped in coordinating the genomics and clinical data within the province of Quebec. Other examples include Seagen assisting investigators across the country to access COVID-19 research funding, help with setup and management of the provincial COVID-19 biobanks in Quebec, in Ontario, and in British Columbia. Also in BC, Seagen is assisting the BC CDC in developing appropriate protocols and implementing of automated high throughput sequence testing. So some examples outside the host-seq, how we've been involved in our response to COVID-19. Now going back to host-seq, how are we able to help in a national response to COVID-19? Well, the most important point to note here is the ability of Seagen to recognize the value of operating in a ready state. And that including internally, if you look internally, the fact that Seagen's infrastructure was already installed and tested for fit. We had the financial stability as a CFI MSI that allowed us to pivot in response to the pandemic. Backed by our track record of success, that allowed for trust and additional support from the federal government in the form of the host-seq project. And our distributed model, so as I said, we had 3 nodes across the country, allowed us to manage the changing environment locally while still operating as a national facility. So luckily, Oker talked a little about those challenges, but luckily all of our nodes were deemed as essential services at the provincial level, which allowed us to continue to remain open. But we had challenges in interacting with the PI labs. Many of the PI labs themselves were closed. And also our ability to work at full capacity with a smaller number of staff was also a challenge. And Walker talked about we were the same while we were doing shifts of cohorts of staff working in the morning, evening, and some even through the night. It's amazing how some of the staff was happy to come through the night and work the night shifts. So which we used to our advantage when they were willing to do it. If we want to look externally, we were able to respond quickly by connecting with a large number of investigators, many of whom were already using Seagen for their research projects across Canada, right? And they were not only familiar with Seagen and our processes, but also had built a level of trust in our ability to deliver on research projects. So when we called upon them, they were very quick to engage and come and be partners. That also gave us the ability to play matchmaker role in bringing researchers with common interests together across the country, resulting in convergence of scientific minds. And I think that will have its implications way beyond the pandemic, where a lot of these researchers will continue to work together and on projects, more national and bigger projects. And then we were also able to connect with international partners in an effort to take part in the global response to pandemic and provide Canada with a seat at the international table when the response to global pandemic was discussed. So I believe that while lessons learned will allow for better preparedness in dealing with future outbreaks and pandemics, most importantly, CFI's support of national facilities to operate in a ready-to-go state is critical for Canadian science and the research community, allowing for the delivery of high-quality, rapid research outcomes and impact. So before I stop, I think I have a minute or so, Mark. So I would like to give you a quick peek at some of the early results and outcomes of our HostSeek project. We were able to connect with over 60 PIs across Canada and have enrolled around 22 of the PI studies into the HostSeek project. And you can see on the map the distribution of the individual PI and the studies that we engaged. We have already surpassed our required commitment of 10,000 participants, as you can see in the blue in the middle left-hand side. We have received around blood for around 200 patients already, and we are either sequenced and looked at or obtained the clinical data associated with it, or in the process in the pipeline of completing that analysis. But we are also receiving samples in hundreds on a daily basis. So what I'm trying to say is the project is going really well and has really picked up pace at this point now. I think I will stop here, Mark. Thank you for everybody's attention. And if there's any questions I can answer, one last thing is just acknowledging the support from all our funders and partners, CFI, Genome Canada, the institutions that host these nodes. They have a lot of input and support that they provide to these nodes and facilities, and also, of course, the other provincial partners and provincial funders. Thank you, Mark, and I'll stop here, and I think I will, try and figure out how to stop sharing. Yeah, there it is.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Naveed. I think I'll open the floor to a few questions. If we have any burning questions for Naveed, you can either type them in the chat or raise your hand, and we will unmute you so you can ask them à vive voix. You can simply speak them. But if not, what I will do is actually, as people are thinking of questions, perhaps I will explain what's going to happen next as we move into the breakout room session. And what I can do is, so obviously the goal here is to identify some of these common challenges. I think we've had some very interesting talks from both Volker and Naveed that gave us an example of some of the ability of the MSIs to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and some of the challenges that were also as a result of this change in the way that we had to operate over this past year. Obviously, this workshop is another example of we're not doing this in person because we have to change and adapt to the current environment. So one thing that we've done is we've come up with a number of different topics that might be of interest to discuss. Naveed mentioned some things about the ready state. They're both identified some topics around financial challenges and financial opportunities that have arisen from from this situation. And so what I'd like to do now is ask Alex, I'll ask you to share the slide with the topics that we've identified, if you don't mind. And the goal here is really to come up with topics that are of interest to the participants to discuss. So we've identified a few as a starting point, but if you have other areas, other things that have come up through the discussions or through the presentations that we've seen already, or other topics that you feel are also of importance, then feel free to type those in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand, so you can go into the for raising your hand in Zoom. It's either under your reactions button or in the participants list that you're able to do so. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Sorry, now I've lost my notes. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Some technical issues.
That's fine. That's one of the challenges that comes up is technical. So if we could get a sense, I'll give people a minute or two to read through both the breakout rooms that we've sort of prepared and the questions that we've associated with them, and then I will open the floor to adding any other topics that people might want to discuss. And then once we've got a list of topics to discuss, what I'll do is we'll open up a poll to see which areas have the most interest, and we'll create the breakout rooms. The next, what the plan is to have about a 20-minute discussion in the breakout rooms. Essentially identify the topic, identify some of the challenges that have come up, and the ultimate goal is to come up with some good practices that can be shared amongst the participants. We will have in each of the rooms a CFI staff member there to take notes and to try and summarize some of the key good practices that have come out of the discussion there. In the interest of time, what I'd like to do is have two consecutive breakout sessions. So we'll do one breakout where you'll be able to discuss one of the topics, and then we will reconvene into the main session to split up a second time into a second set of breakout rooms where you can choose a different topic to discuss. So you won't be restricted to just having one particular discussion. What this means is we don't necessarily have time in the meeting itself to have each of the different breakout rooms report back to the main session. And that's where our notes and our feedback will be collated. And we will share those notes on the MSI workshop webpage, which will be accessible once we've got that. Once we have the notes all collated, we will post those on the website along with the two presentations we've seen here. So I will stop talking so that people can read some of the topics there and identify which ones are of interest to them. And if there are additional topics to add to the list, then please do put them in the chat or raise your hand and we will call on you to speak.